Welcome back to Wealth of Words. We always like to take a look at some of the most fascinating books out there, and tonight we're diving into one that might just give you a superpower. I'm Richard.
And I'm Isabella. That's right, we're talking about nudge, improving decisions about health, wealth, and happiness. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. They make a pretty compelling case that you can, in fact, nudge people towards better decisions without limiting their freedom.
Now, before you think this is some kind of Machiavellian mind control, let me assure you, it's not that sinister. It's more about understanding how our choices are influenced by the way they're presented to us. They call this choice architecture.
Yeah, think of it this way. You walk into a cafeteria, and right at eye level, there's this beautiful salad bar, all colorful and tempting. Chances are you're probably more likely to grab some greens, right? That's choice architecture at play.
So it's like being a subtle architect of decisions, almost like setting up the dominoes to fall in a particular way. But how does that mesh with the whole libertarian angle?
Well, that's where libertarian paternalism comes in. It's this intriguing idea that you can guide people towards choices that are good for them, while still preserving their freedom to choose differently. It's not about coercion, it's about making the desired choice the easy choice.
Okay, so not mind control, but maybe a little bit like a GPS for life. You can still choose to ignore the suggested route. But hey, who doesn't love a shortcut? Can you give us an example of this in action?
Absolutely. Automatic enrollment in retirement savings plans. It's a classic nudge. People are still free to opt out, but by making enrollment the default, you significantly increase participation. People just tend to stick with what's already chosen for them.
It's like opting out of that extra cheese on your pizza.
Yeah.
You should, but it takes effort.
Speaking of effort, the authors of Nudge also point out that we're not always these perfectly rational beings that economists make us out to be.
Right, we're not always econs making calculated decisions based on pure logic. We're humans, prone to emotions, biases, and a whole lot of irrationality. And sometimes, our short-term desires completely sabotage our long-term goals. It's like knowing you should hit the gym, but ending up on the couch with a bag of chips. So how do nudges help us overcome these, shall we say, human moments?
Well, imagine you put your workout clothes right by the door. It's a little nudge that makes it just a tad easier to choose the gym over the chips.
I like that. You're not forcing yourself. You're just making the better choice more convenient. It's a bit like choosing the stairs when the elevator's right there. Speaking of making better choices, Nudge has this fascinating concept called the Save More Tomorrow program. What's that all about?
Oh, this is a great example of how nudges can be really clever. It plays on our tendency to be more willing to commit to future sacrifices than to give something up right now. So instead of asking people to save more now, it has them commit to increasing their savings rate later, typically when they get a raise.
That's pretty brilliant. You delay the pain of saving, but you still end up saving more in the long run. It's almost like tricking your future self into being responsible.
Exactly. And it works. This program has been incredibly effective in boosting retirement savings. It shows that sometimes a little nudge can have a huge impact on our financial well-being.
It sounds like we could all use a few well-placed nudges in our lives. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of designing our own nudge-filled world, let's take a quick break. Stick with us, folks. There's a lot more to unpack in this fascinating exploration of choice architecture and the power of nudges.
Welcome back to Wealth of Words. You know, one of the things that really struck me about Nudge is how they highlight the power of defaults. We touched on this with the retirement savings example, but it goes way beyond that.
You mean like how our phone settings automatically update, and we rarely bother to change them back,
Yeah.
even if we don't love the new feature?
Exactly. Or think about organ donation. In some countries, you have to opt out if you don't want to be a donor, and their donation rates are significantly higher than places where you have to opt in. It's fascinating how a simple change in the default can have such a huge impact.
It seems like our brains are wired to take the path of least resistance, which makes sense, I guess. Who wants to spend all their time second-guessing every little decision?
Right. We rely on these mental shortcuts to navigate the world, but that means we need to be mindful of the defaults that are set for us, whether it's by policymakers, companies, or even just our own habits.
So knowing that, are there any other areas where we can use defaults to our advantage, besides setting up those automatic retirement contributions, of course?
Absolutely. Think about your investment accounts. Are they set up to automatically invest in a diversified portfolio? Or are you leaving your money sitting idle in a low-interest savings account?
Oof, that hits close to home. I've been meaning to look into that. But you know how it is. Life gets busy. And it's easy to just stick with the status quo.
It's that inertia at play again. But think of the potential benefits if you just set it and forget it. A little nudge can go a long way.
Okay, I'm convinced. I'm adding revisit investment defaults to my to-do list. Speaking of nudges that influence our behavior, what about social proof? That idea that we often look to others to guide our actions, especially when we're unsure.
Oh, social proof is incredibly powerful. Think about it. You're walking down the street and you see a crowd of people all staring up at something. What do?
I definitely look up too. Even if I had no idea what they were looking at, it's like some primal instinct kicks in.
Exactly. And marketers know this. They use social proof all the time to influence our decisions. Think about those bestseller tags or customer testimonials you see everywhere.
Or even just those little notifications on social media that tell you how many people have liked or commented on a post. It makes you want to check it out,
Yeah.
even if it's something you wouldn't normally be interested in.
It's all about tapping into our desire to fit in and make the right choices. And it's not always a bad thing. Want to start exercising regularly, join a gym or running club where you're surrounded by people who are already doing it.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like choosing the salad when everyone else at the table is ordering one. Peer pressure can be a good thing sometimes.
It's about creating a positive feedback loop. You see others succeeding, it reinforces your belief that you can too, and suddenly the behavior becomes normalized. It's no longer this daunting thing you have to force yourself to do.
So if you're trying to break a bad habit or adopt a good one, surrounding yourself with people who are already living the way you want to live can be a powerful nudge. It's like choosing your own peer pressure, in a way. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's talk about something else nudge touches on: decision paralysis. You know, that feeling of being overwhelmed when you have too many choices.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like trying to pick a movie on Netflix. You scroll through endless options, and in the end, you just give up and watch the same show you've seen 100 times.
Or going to a restaurant with a menu the size of a phone book. I end up ordering the same thing every time, just to avoid the mental overload.
The authors of Nudge argue that too much choice can actually be detrimental. It can lead to worse decisions, procrastination, and even anxiety. They call it the paradox of choice.
So less is more when it comes to decision making.
In many cases, yes. Simplifying choices can actually lead to better outcomes. Think about employers who offer a smaller, curated selection of 401k options. They often see higher participation rates because employees aren't overwhelmed by a sea of choices.
So what's the takeaway here? Should we all be striving for a minimalist lifestyle with limited options?
Not necessarily, but it's about being mindful of the number of choices we're faced with and finding ways to simplify the decision-making process. It might mean limiting your options to the top 3 contenders, or setting a time limit for making a decision.
It's like creating a framework for decision making. So you're not constantly starting from scratch. You're streamlining the process and freeing up mental energy to focus on what really matters. But before we dive into creating our own personalized decision-making frameworks, we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more from Nudge and explore how you can become your own choice architect. Welcome back to Wealth of Words. You know, as we've been talking about these nudges, it's clear they can be powerful tools for individuals. But what's really intriguing is how they can be applied on a much larger scale to tackle some pretty big societal challenges.
Absolutely. Thaler and Sunstein. They dedicate a good portion of Nudge to exploring how governments and organizations can use these principles to encourage everything from healthier eating habits to increased voter turnout.
It makes you wonder if we could nudge our way to a better world, one small step at a time. And we've seen how effective something as simple as changing the default option can be.
Right.
Could we apply that same logic to things like promoting environmentally friendly behavior?
They definitely argue that's possible. For example, making green energy the default option for new customers, or automatically enrolling people in energy-saving programs. It's about making it easier for people to do the right thing, even if they're not actively thinking about it.
It's like that saying, make it easy to do right and hard to do wrong. And it seems like nudges achieve that in a way that traditional regulations or penalties often don't.
That's right. Nudges are often more effective because they're less intrusive and less likely to trigger resistance. People don't feel like they're being forced to do something, they're simply being guided in a particular direction.
It's a subtle art of persuasion, almost like whispering in someone's ear instead of shouting at them through a megaphone.
Exactly, and that's a key point. Nudges always preserve freedom of choice. People are always free to opt out or choose a different path. But by carefully designing the environment, you can make the desired choice the most appealing and easiest to make.
It's like building a path through the woods. You're not forcing people to take that path, but you're making it the most obvious and inviting option. And hey, if they want to bushwhack their way through the thorns, that's their prerogative.
Precisely. So it's not about manipulating people. It's about understanding how they make decisions and then designing choices in a way that aligns with their best interests and the greater good.
So if we're all capable of recognizing these nudges and how they influence us, it seems like we all have the potential to be choice architects in our own lives.
That's a great way to put it. We can use these principles to design our environments, our habits, and even our relationships to nudge ourselves and those around us toward better outcomes.
It's like taking control of the invisible forces that shape our choices and using them to create a world that's a little bit healthier, a little bit happier, and maybe even a little bit kinder.
Well said. And the best part is, it doesn't require any grand gestures or radical overhauls. It's about those small, intentional tweaks that can make a surprisingly big difference.
So as we wrap up our discussion on nudge, I think the main takeaway is this. We have more power than we realize to shape our choices and the choices of those around us. By understanding the subtle science of nudges, we can become architects of our own lives and contribute to building a world where the best choice is also the easiest choice.
Beautifully put. And for our listeners out there, I encourage you to pick up a copy of Nudge and start exploring this fascinating world for yourselves. You might be surprised at how much power you have to nudge your way to a better life and a better world.
And as always, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you most from our discussion? What are some nudges you've noticed in your own life? Share your thoughts with us on social media using #WealthOfWords. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those nudges coming.
And don't forget to follow Wealth of Words so you don't miss out on our next fascinating book discussion. Thanks for joining us. Good night. And
Bye.
happy nudging.